Hi, I'm Steven Smith. I'm here at SneakerCon Southeast Asia in Singapore, and it's amazing to be back here. How did I get started? I ran track in high school, and I loved running, and I wore New Balance 990s, which wore like iron. It was such a great shoe. And when I graduated, I needed a job, and one of my friends told me about New Balance was hiring the first designers ever. And so I went and interviewed. I ran a New Balance. It would be kind of cool to design the shoes I ran in. And I interviewed and got the job the next day. So I was the second full-time designer in New Balance's history. So it was pretty amazing time to be there because this really didn't exist as a career, as a sneaker designer. It was a new thing. And we had the opportunity to either make it cool or just another job. And I think we made it cool that a lot of people want to do it now. And it was a very exciting time to be a trailblazer in this industry. Kind of depends on which brand and what the intent of the product is. Sometimes I gather a few images of other objects or things that inspire me in my life at the time. For a while I was into my Vespa and scooter mods from English times in the 60s, and that definitely influenced the style and flavor and vibe of what I was doing. Now with Yeezy it was a little different, where Ye would send me an image of something random and I'd have to riff off of that or try to figure out what he was doing, or a fashion item that it needed to cue off of, or whatever his seasonal concept of what he was about. Oh, an interesting story about creating with Ye. There's definitely many. One of my favorites was probably the 700 Wave Runner. The market was into very simple design at that time. The Nike Roshi, the 350 had just launched, and he asked me to start drawing these things that were reminiscent of my old New Balance shoes from the 80s. And I'm like, why is he asking me to do this? Everything else is simple, clean, welded. I was doing this shoe that was almost like a retro throwback with multiple components and stitching. And it was much more complex and very different than where the market was at. Out of it came this magical thing that became the Wave Runner. And at the end of all of it, he's like, you know what I made you do? I'm like, what's that? He goes, I made you design your New Balance shoe if you still weren't there 30 years later. And out of it came the Wave Runner. And I'm like, you're right. You did do that. It was a pretty magical time. We were surrounded by music and art and other creatives who were working on the tour merch, who were working on apparel and fashion. It was a very different environment where you were surrounded by all these other creative disciplines at once. And that's where I became kind of this collective vessel of what represented Yeezy DNA going forward. So I think that moment and that product was a very special time for me with him. Gosh, that's a tough one to answer, I just like to be known as an industrial designer and a product designer. Because at the end of the day, what we ended up being was this weird hybridization of fashion and sport, but for me, it always rooted in sport. Everything I did, including the Wave Runner, was rooted in true sport. You could actually go running, even though it became known as like a fashion or style or streetwear product. It was still known for the ability to go out and run 5 miles in it if you so choose. And that's what my things were like a product solution for competition, for running, for basketball. They were rooted in authenticity, and I think that's what separated it from a lot of what people do for streetwear. If you were doing something, say, for a Chanel or Louis Vuitton, it was still rooted in fashion. And I think for me, it was the authenticity for sport that drove me to what they were in competition. Again, for me, that rooting and authenticity is very important, but I think things should be fun, which is what it needed to be overall, was fun, exciting, interesting, and capture people's imagination and heart and soul. You can't just draw another shoe or another sneaker. It has to be something magic, rewarding, that touches people emotionally, and I think that's very important. And I think as we look at the future, there's amazing new processes and materials. For me, going forward with Crocs, it's molded. That whole idea that you can create new forms through molding rather than just be tied to leathers and meshes. And also 3D printing, I think, holds a big component into the future. And I think it allows you to do new aesthetics, new materials, and definitely new comfort level that people haven't experienced before, and definitely new styles and looks. I think when I worked at Nike, my development counterpart, a really cool guy named Chris Cook, we looked up at innovation. We were the innovation team for the running category, and we were kind of disappointed because the definition for innovation was new and different, and we were like, that's bullshit. It should be new and better. And so we renamed ourselves New and Better Team. And I think that's an important thing for anybody getting into this to remember is, are you really making something new and better? I mean, anybody can do different, that's easy. But it should be better every time. It should be more comfortable than anything you've ever made before. It should fit better than anything you've ever made before. And I think that's something to keep in mind, and that's what's led to these longevities of my designs, is they were better or they were more comfortable than what was out there. And I think that's what you need to offer up. And that in itself, newer and better, will always make you different than everybody else. And I think that's a good driving force to what you want to create. You want to create this emotional attachment to the product that people can't forget. They always have this fond memory of that first time they wore it, like, this thing was amazing, there's a magic, there's a connection to it, that spiritual connection. And keep that in mind in what you create, and that will automatically become a lasting, memorable, iconic product.